All right, why don't we make a start? Good evening. Hello, welcome. Welcome to Green College and welcome to the Resident Member Series. My name is Nico and I have the privilege and honor of being one of the co-chairs for the Resident Member Series alongside Aaron. For those who are maybe new to the college or are coming back for a while or on Zoom, the Green College Resident Member Series is a great opportunity for resident members to present on a topic of their choice. Could be their research or something that they find interesting in a really friendly and collegial environment. All of our talks here at Green College are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. And this land has always been a place of learning far beyond Green College's establishment. And we want to kind of root our time in that. We're delighted to have Anthony, a resident member, here with us to present on a very fascinating topic on what makes a good life good. Anthony is a PhD student here in the Department of Philosophy here at UBC, and the conversations that we've had over dinner, over breakfast, are always fascinating to have Anthony as a fellow dialogue member in the college. And so we'll have time for Anthony to speak, and then we'll transition into a bit of a Q&A. And so please do have those questions ready at the end. We'll be moderating that. And if you have any questions on Zoom as well, please do feel free to put those in the chat and we'll attend to them following Anthony's presentation. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Anthony.
All right, thanks everyone for coming to this talk. Can everyone hear me all right on Zoom? I think my microphone's on. All right, cool. All right, so the title of my talk today is What Makes a Good Life Good? So we all want to live a good life, right? Where the relevant kind of goodness we have in mind isn't moral goodness necessarily, but a kind of goodness that's good for us. It's the distinct kind of goodness that we acquire when we're benefited by certain things, events, or states of affairs, and the measure by which we determine the degree to which our lives go well. The concept being alluded to here is that of well-being. Good lives, in the sense just described, are those that are high in well-being, also referred to as prudential value, also referred to as welfare. All right, so this question of what it means to live a good life goes back to ancient times. So in Plato's dialogue Protagoras, we have this dialogue between Socrates and Protagoras. So Socrates says, Protagoras, do you agree that some people live their lives well while others badly? And then Protagoras agreed. And then Socrates asked, and do you think any person would live his life well if he were to live in distress and suffering? No, he said. And then Socrates asked, what if he were to live his life pleasantly to the very end? Don't you think he would have lived his life well in so doing? I do, he replied. Not a very talkative guy, so then Socrates said, so to live pleasantly is good, while to live unpleasantly is bad. So this is one of the early instances of, earlier instances of someone expressing a view I'm going to talk about called hedonism. But before I get into hedonism, I need to say a little bit something more about what kind of goodness that we're talking about when we're talking about well-being / welfare. And the kind of goodness that we have in mind when philosophers are thinking about well-being is intrinsic goodness, where something is intrinsically good just in case it's good for its own sake, rather than for the sake of something else. Some people also refer to this as final goodness or final value. The terms are kind of used interchangeably. So to give you an idea of what this means, so suppose that you were asked a series of questions. So like, why is it good to go to college? And you might say, well, because going to college allows you to get a good education. And so then if you were to be asked, why is it good to get a good education? You might say, because then you can get a good job. And then if you were asked, why is it good to get a good job? You might respond, because then you can make money, right? Well, why is it good to make money? And you might say, because then you can meet your essential needs, right? You need money to survive, to get food and everything. Well, why is it good to meet your essential needs? And then you might say, well, I need to meet my essential needs in order to be happy. And then if I were to ask you this, why is it good to be happy? This is where the answering the question seems to stop, right? It seems like happiness isn't good for the sake of something else. It's good for its own sake. Happiness is just good fundamentally. It's good for its own sake, and that is what's meant by intrinsic goodness. It's something that's good. So, sometimes people might have in mind when they talk about welfare or well-being certain like material goods, but really like these material goods like money, food, they're really instrumentally good. They're good for the sake of something more fundamental like happiness. So this is what philosophers are trying to get at when they're talking about well-being. What's good for its own sake? What's fundamentally good? All right. So with that being said, here is a very popular response to this question, and that's hedonism. Well, I shouldn't say popular because it's not exactly popular right now. I should say it's a very natural response to the question. And according to hedonism, our lives go well to the extent that they are pleasant or happy, and they go poorly to the extent that they are unpleasant or unhappy. So what makes a good life good on this view is that it's a life full of pleasure or happiness. And so the more pleasure you have, the better off you are. And if we compare two lives, one life is better than the other in terms of well-being, just in case it contains more pleasure than the other one. And again, we can alternatively put it in terms of happiness, where one life is better than the other in terms of well-being if it has more happiness than the other one. And so that's basically what hedonism says. And there are, hedonism has a lot going for it. So here are some virtues of the theory. One virtue of hedonism is that it makes sense of our intuitions about pleasure and pain benefiting and harming us. Intuitively, it does seem to be the case that pleasure tends to make people better off and pain tends to make people worse off, all other things being equal. And it also makes sense of the variety of ways people's lives can go well, right? So intuitively, there isn't just one way to live a good life, right? There's a variety of ways people can live a good life. Well, hedonism makes sense of that because there's a variety of ways to get pleasure. People take pleasure in different things. And since people take pleasure in different things, that explains why there's different paths to living a good life. And that's one thing it has going for it as well, is that it explains this observation that there's this wide variety of well-lived lives. All right, so those are the virtues of the view. Now, some of the problems with the view. And there have been several objections raised against hedonism. I'm just going to talk about two of them, which I think are two of perhaps the most significant ones. So the first is the experience machine. So this was originally a thought experiment proposed by the philosopher Robert Nozick, and a similar idea was popularized in the film The Matrix. So here's the idea. Suppose you have a choice between two lives, okay? Life number one, you have a life full of pleasure and awesome experiences, meaningful relationships, significant achievements. And life number one is in the real world, the world that we're living in right now. That's option number one. Option number two is a life that's experientially identical to life number one, okay? Meaning that all your experiences will be the same. And as they were in life number one, except instead of being in the real world, you're going to be plugged into a machine that is going to be artificially generating all these experiences. And so in the experience machine, none of the people that you think you're friends with actually exist. None of the people you think love you or you love actually exist. You never actually achieve any of the things that you think you achieve, because in reality, you're just hooked up to a chair like this. But on the plus side, you won't know that you're in the experience machine when you're plugged in. So yeah, so that's the experience machine. So again, life number one, awesome life, lots of great experiences, meaningful relationships, great accomplishments. Life number two, experientially the same, all the same experiences, but you're plugged into this machine. So the question is, well, which life would you choose? Which life would make you better off? And most people have the intuition that clearly life number one is the better life. Even though that the two lives are experientially the same, and so they're also the same in terms of pleasure or happiness, that the first life is better because it has, oh, sorry.
I have a question, but you can finish your thought first.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so even though these are experientially the same, a lot of people have the intuition that the first life is better because you have real relationships, real accomplishments. But hedonism, according to hedonism, these two lives are equally good because they're the same in terms of pleasure. And so that is a big problem for hedonism because it goes against this intuition that many people have. All right, so that's the experience machine problem. Did you want to?
Yeah. So you said that they're experientially identical, but
Yeah.
maybe one factor that I see is differentiating is that in the second scenario, there's regret after you come out of the like you when you're plugged in, you don't know, obviously, but when you plugged in, but before you plugged in or after you plug out,
Yeah.
there's the real sense of regret, and that how is it identical if you count that in?
So at what point would you experience the regret?
Probably before you plug in or after.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. So, I mean, we can imagine a version of the case where your like memory is wiped clean or something before you plug in. So to really like make it, parallel. Or you can also present the case in a way where you have to make the choice for someone else. Like say you have to make the choice about like whether your child is going to live the real life or the life in the experience machine. Which one would be better for your child's well-being? That's another way to frame the problem. So it's not focused on you necessarily. Yeah. Okay, so that's the experience machine. So that's one big problem with hedonism. Here is another problem. So this is the problem of painful art. This is a big problem for aesthetic hedonism in the philosophical subfield of aesthetics, where aesthetic hedonism basically says that the goodness of art comes from the pleasant experiences we get from art. And hedonism as a theory of well-being also runs into a similar problem. So the idea is that hedonism is unable to account for the fact that we can be benefited by painful art. Take the experience, for instance, of watching Schindler's List, which follows the story of Oskar Schindler, who saved the lives of 1,200 Jewish people during the Holocaust. The film is celebrated for its aesthetic value, despite being painful and upsetting to endure, giving the viewer a vivid glimpse of the horrifying realities of the Holocaust. So the problem is that, in order to get around this problem, hedonism must either deny that tragic works of art like Schindler's List are either they must deny that these works of art are painful, or they must deny that they're beneficial. Because according to hedonism, we're only benefited, we're only made better off by pleasant experiences. And so if this is truly an unpleasant experience watching these kinds of films, then they can't make us better off. But intuitively, we are made better off when we take in painful art like Schindler's List. So hedonism has a difficult job accounting for this. All right, so given the problems with hedonism, let's move on to the next type of theory, which is desire satisfaction theory. So according to desire satisfaction theory, basically well-being consists in getting what we want. According to desire satisfaction theory, our lives go well to the extent that our desires are satisfied, and they go poorly to the extent that our desires are frustrated. Now, I should clarify something about this notion of desire satisfaction. So a desire satisfaction doesn't necessarily involve a feeling of satisfaction, okay? Rather, a desire satisfaction simply involves two things. One, that you want something to be the case, and two, that the thing you want is actually the case. That's all there is to a desire satisfaction. So your desire is satisfied independently of whether you feel satisfied or any other mental states. So besides wanting it to be the case. So you want something to be the case, and the thing you want is actually the case. So for example, if I want to be eating the apple and I actually am eating the apple, that's a desire satisfaction. Or if I want to pass the class and I actually pass the class, then that's also a desire satisfaction. So our lives go well. Basically, so lives that have more of these desire satisfactions are better off than lives that don't have these desire satisfactions. Similarly, desire frustration makes our lives worse off. Okay, so a desire frustration similarly involves two things: wanting something to be the case, and then the thing you want is not the case. So wanting to eat the apple, but I don't get to eat the apple, or I want to pass the class, but I don't pass the class. So desire frustrations make our lives worse. Desire satisfactions make our lives better, according to this view. All right, so desire satisfaction theory also has a lot going for it. So it also makes sense, like hedonism, of the variety of things that make people's lives go well, because people desire a great variety of things. So again, similar to how the fact that people take pleasure in a variety of things explains the variety of ways people's lives go well according to hedonism. The fact that people can desire a variety of things explains why there's a variety of ways people's lives can go well according to desire satisfaction theory. And another virtue of the view is that it's able to avoid the experience machine problem. Why? Because a desire satisfaction theorist could say, yeah, the experience machine life is worse than the life in the real world because you have more desire frustration in the experience machine than you do in the real world. We want to be actually loved by people. And so in the experience machine, we're not getting what we want. We're not actually loved by people. Similarly, we want to actually accomplish things. And in the experience machine, we're not actually accomplishing things. And so since there's more desire frustration in the experience machine, that's why we're worse off in the experience machine, according to this view. And then similarly, this view can handle the painful art problem because simply because we can desire painful things, right? So a desire satisfaction theorist could say that watching something like Schindler's List can benefit a person just in case they desire that painful experience. And so they're able to accommodate this, they're able to address this problem as well as the experience machine problem. Okay, so those are some virtues of the view. Now here are some problems with desire satisfaction theory. So the first problem is known as the problem of ill-informed desires, okay? So suppose that someone presents you with a juicy, enticing apple, and you really want to eat this apple, right? But unbeknownst to you, it's a poison apple, right? So desire satisfaction theory suggests that you getting what you want here benefits you. You getting the poison apple and you eating the poison apple is good for you. But clearly, it's not only not good for you, but it's harmful to you, right? Now, desire satisfaction theorists try to get around this problem by moving to what's called a full information desire satisfaction theory account. So what they'll say is something like, it's not the satisfaction of your actual desires that benefit you. It's the satisfaction of the desires that you would have if you had full access to information about the world that's relevant to the situation you're in right now when you're having this desire. Okay, so and if you had full access to the information that's relevant to your situation when presented with this poison apple, one of the pieces of relevant information that you would have is that this thing is poison, and so you would not want to eat it anymore. Okay, so that's what some desire satisfaction theorists do, is they move from a simple desire satisfaction account to a full information or idealized desire satisfaction account to get around this problem. But even full information versions of desire satisfaction theory run into serious problems. One of these problems is known as the problem of remote desires. Okay, so suppose you meet someone on a train and you have a good conversation with them, and you find out that this person is interviewing for a job. Okay, and after having this conversation, you want them to get the job, okay? And it turns out that they do get the job, but you never find out about this because you never meet this person again, okay? So desire satisfaction theory implies that the fact this person gets this job somehow benefits you, even though you never find out that they got this job. Why? Because you desired that they got the job, and they got the job. But intuitively, it seems like that this sort of desire satisfaction isn't the sort of thing that benefits you, because it doesn't affect you or your life in any way, right? You never meet this person again, you never find out this information. So how can it be a benefit to you? How can it increase your well-being if it doesn't affect you at all? And a full information account can't help here. A full information account doesn't help here because we can easily imagine a case where you have full information, you have full access to all the relevant facts at the time of forming this desire that this person gets the job, and even with full information, you can still form this desire, no problem. All right, so that's a second problem for desire satisfaction theories. And here's a third problem, the problem of pointless desires. So suppose someone is fully informed, right? So they pass the full information test, and yet somehow all they desire is to spend their entire life going around counting individual blades of grass, okay? Suppose also that instead of being a lifelong grass counter, they could spend their life as a brilliant mathematician, and that this would be a life where they would accomplish great things, make some mathematical discoveries. But suppose that this life as a mathematician would have just as much desire satisfaction as the life of grass counting. Okay, we can imagine like maybe each day they form a new desire to count grass on a different patch or like a different park or something, right? And we can easily imagine a case where the grass counter has just as much desire satisfaction as the mathematician, even after full information. And according to desire satisfaction theory, these lives would be equally good prudentially. These would be equally good for the people involved. And that just seems weird, right? It seems weird that these two lives would be equally good for the people. So that's the problem of pointless desires. I mean, you can, another example people have proposed is like a life of just repeatedly bouncing a ball against the wall over and over again. But you get the idea. All right, so we've seen the virtues of hedonism and the problems with hedonism and the virtues of desire satisfaction theory and the problems with desire satisfaction theory. So here's the third major kind of theory that's discussed in the literature, and that's objectivist theory. So objectivist theory basically says that well-being consists in getting things that are objectively good for us. Some proposals for things that are objectively good for us include pleasure. So they want to keep pleasure on the list, but pleasure isn't the only thing. According to objectivist theorists, they also will add knowledge. The more knowledge we get, and some people don't say, some people put a condition on the kind of knowledge that benefits you. Like they'll usually say something like, it's significant knowledge that benefits you. So like knowledge about how many blades of grass there are on the UBC campus might not be something that makes your life any better off. But if you acquire knowledge, say of like the fundamental laws of physics, then like that is significant knowledge. And so that kind of knowledge can make your life better off. So pleasure is one thing that's been proposed on the list. Knowledge is another thing, or significant knowledge. Achievement. And we might also like put a condition on this, like maybe significant achievement. Friendships and loving relationships, right? This is what's missing in the experience machine. And then virtue. So people have different ideas of, what they mean by virtue, but this goes back to Aristotle, where the basic idea is that virtue involves these character traits that are part of living a good life, like courage or temperance or generosity. So if you have these good character traits, perhaps that makes your life go better, according to the objectivist theorists. And objectivist theory has, here are the virtues of this view. So for one, it avoids the experience machine problem. So why does it avoid the experience machine problem? Because as I alluded to, the good of friendships and loving relationships is missing from the experience machine. And so objectivist theory can explain why that life is worse for you. And the good of achievement is also missing from the experience machine. So it avoids that problem, and it avoids the painful art problem, because an objectivist theorist might say that there's some objectively valuable knowledge that you acquire from certain kinds of tragic art, like Schindler's List, even if you aren't pleased by it. And so in virtue of this objectively valuable, significant knowledge, then that's why the film makes you better off, they might say. And it also avoids the problem of pointless desire satisfaction, simply because a life of counting individual blades of grass would almost certainly not go on the list of things that are objectively good for you. Okay, so that's objectivist theory. Those are some virtues. Now here are some problems with objectivist theory. One problem is this notion of objective value that is so central to it. Some philosophers have no problem with this idea of objective value. Some philosophers get very upset about the idea of objective value. They don't like it. And I tend to be on the side of being skeptical of the notion of objective value. One might question like what it means for something to be objectively valuable. What does it mean so according to objective list theorists, these things are good for you independently of whether they please you or whether you desire them, right? And so one might ask, what does that mean? Where does this objective value come from that's in these things? And how do we explain that objective value? And this is a problem that faces those who want to propose these kinds of views. Another problem is that these kinds of views lack a certain unification that hedonism and desire satisfaction theory have, right? So there's a sort of elegance to hedonism and desire satisfaction theory, right? Because well-being is fundamentally either getting more pleasure or getting more desire satisfaction, and all of well-being is unified under those two simple concepts. Whereas objective list theory will say, well, there's this thing that's good for you, and there's this other thing that's good for you, and then there's this third thing that's good for you. And we might ask, okay, well, this seems a little cobbled, together, right? There's not the unity to this sort of view that is present in the other views. And yeah. So that's one problem. And then a third problem is what's known as the resonance problem. So as I said, the objective list theorists will say that, friendship is good for you, knowledge is good for you, or significant knowledge is good for you, even if you're not pleased by this knowledge, or even if you're not pleased by these friendships, and even if you don't want these friendships, even if you don't want this knowledge, right? But that raises a problem though, right? Because a lot of people have the intuition that when we are theorizing about well-being, one of the constraints that we should put on our theorizing is that the thing that benefits us must resonate with us in some way. We must be attracted to it in some way, or we must at least find it compelling in some way. Because if we're not attracted to the thing that's supposed to benefit us, in what sense does it benefit us, right? In what sense are we better off by these things if we're not attracted to them at all, right? So this is what's known as the resonance problem, and objective list theorists, they'll just put their foot on the ground and say, no, these things, the view has other virtues that, allows us to basically not have to worry about this problem. Okay, so, and one thing there is another approach here that I'm going to mention briefly, and that's hybrid views. So hybrid views will have they will take the resonance problem seriously, and they'll say that, okay, you're right, there's this resonance problem. We have to present on our list of goods things that resonate with people, things that they're attracted to. And so what they'll say is okay, well-being actually involves two components. There is objective value out there. So, friendships are objectively good, but only if you are attracted to that friendship. So if you're attracted to the friendship and given that friendship is objectively good, those two components together are what benefit you. So the objective value of the friendship alone doesn't benefit you. The subjective attraction alone doesn't benefit you. You have to be subjectively attracted to things that are objectively valuable, basically, on these views in order to get a benefit. So if you're subjectively attracted to grass counting and grass counting isn't objectively valuable, then that doesn't benefit you. The thing that you're attracted to has to also be objectively valuable on these sorts of hybrid theories. Okay, so that is objective list theory. So given all these problems with these views, oh, one thing I should say, so one problem that still remains, of course, with hybrid views is that they have this notion of objective value that they're also committed to. But there's this question of where do we go from here, right? So all these major views have all these problems. And so, yeah, where do we go from here in terms of theorizing about well-being? Well, one thing we can do is we can come up with a new kind of theory, or we can try to defend one of the existing views against these problems. And I tend to go for the latter option, and the view that I am currently in the process of defending is a modification or extension of hedonism. Okay, so my response to all these problems is that maybe we should actually reconsider a version of hedonism. Instead of just pleasant or happy experiences being relevant, we should also include meaningful experiences as relevant. So on my view, which I'm calling a form of experientialism, our lives go well to the extent that they contain pleasant or meaningful experiences. And what I mean by a meaningful experience is basically an experience that you deeply endorse or that you value for its own sake. And meaningful experiences aren't necessarily pleasant experiences. So I think it's helpful to think of the problem of painful art here. So on my view, certain unpleasant works of art like Schindler's List can still benefit us in virtue of providing a meaningful experience, an experience that we deeply endorse, an experience that we have a conviction that it's important for us to have, even if this experience isn't pleasant, okay? And because Schindler's List provides a meaningful experience, that explains why it's valuable for us. That explains why it makes us better off, even though it's painful. So this sort of experientialist view is able to get around the painful art problem. Now the experience machine objection, I'm still working on this. This is something that I definitely have a lot more thinking to do. But the general strategy that I think has some promise is providing some independent arguments for why we should accept what's known in the literature as an experience requirement on well-being. And this is the idea that two beings can only differ in their well-being if they differ in their experiences. And so if we are convinced by independent arguments for why that principle is true, for why two beings can't differ in their well-being unless they differ in their experiences, then logically we would just be led to conclude that contrary to our intuitions, the life outside the experience machine doesn't benefit us. So that's kind of the approach that I'm drawn to taking. I still have to work out the details. And again, I have a lot more thinking to do about how exactly to do that, but this is my general proposal. And yeah, thank you.
Presentation. We'd like to move on to our portion of Q&A and for an opportunity to engage in continuous dialogue with some of the things that you brought up. And so we'd love it if we could have raise of hands. And if you'd like to moderate and take one in turn or two in turn. And then I'll also see if we can attend to anyone on Zoom as well. If you are watching live online, we'd love to attend to your questions. And so please, there's no shortage of questions.
Do we have a mic or something? Or...
No, we don't need one. It's
okay. Yeah, Andrew.
I have several questions sort of swimming around. I'll try to pick one. I guess I am wondering what it means to be an adherent to one of these philosophies. So is the idea that if you are an experientialist, okay, let's do this one on the one side understand more fully because of the meditation. Let's say if I'm a desire satisfaction theorist, does that mean that I think my life goes better if more of my desires are satisfied and less are frustrated? Or do I think that most people believe that most people's like internal mechanisms for determining whether their life is good is based on that desired satisfaction? Or do I believe that this applies to everyone no matter whether they believe it or not? Like, do I think that if I have two people who have what I would call like a good life by desire satisfaction standards, but one of them, they're both philosophers. One of them's a desire satisfaction theorist and the other one's a hedonist.
Yeah.
Do I think that they have equally good lives, even though one of them, like according to his own standards, is like not living a good life, and the other one, according to her own standards, is like how to...
Yeah. So I mean, I guess like one way to look at it is like we're trying to get at what the notion of well-being is. Like, what does it mean for someone to be higher in well-being?
And that's it. That's also, you said, independent of morality, like...
Yes. Yeah.
So all of like these theories, like for instance, hedonism and desire satisfaction theory itself, probably not objectiveless theorists, but those first two, like a serial killer who loves doing serial killing is living a good life.
Right. Right. Yeah. And actually, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. There's actually a really good quote by, so this is a text that's often used in intro to ethics classes called The Fundamental of Ethics by Rush Schaefer Landau. So he spends the first 4 chapters talking about well-being, and he addresses this very point about evil pleasures, as it's called, right? So yeah, you like this is actually like sometimes people do raise this as an objection to hedonism. You can raise like a very similar objection to desire satisfaction theory. You can desire things that are like, morally wrong, or you can take pleasure in things that are morally wrong. And yeah, so he says, let's see, this is in, yeah, here we go. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here to not take up too much time, but he says, hedonists don't think that each episode of happiness is as morally good as every other. Rather, they think that the same amount of happiness, no matter its source, is equally beneficial. According to hedonism, happiness gained from evil deeds can improve our lives just as much as happiness that comes from virtue. In this sense, happiness derived from evil deeds is as good as happiness that comes from virtue. Each can contribute to our well-being just as much as the other. And aren't they right in thinking that? Think about why the happiness of the wicked is so upsetting. Isn't it precisely because happiness benefits them and we hate to see the wicked prosper? If happiness doesn't make us better off, why is it so awful when the wicked enjoy the harms they cause? So the idea is that we have to distinguish between 2 different kinds of goodness. There's moral goodness, and then there's prudential goodness, or goodness for the individual. And so someone can be very well off in terms of well-being, despite taking their pleasure in immoral things. And Rush Schaefer Landau's point is that it partly explains why we're so upset by people who do that, because we know that they're benefiting from these things. Yeah. Dominic?
Yeah. So I think that the last time we talked, I told you that I was kind of agreeing with your view in the end.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I kind of like the value objectivist theory.
Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to raise a couple of points in favor of the theory and see what you think about those. Can you go back to the list of the problems, maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I thought you might like that view.
Yeah, I like that. No, you repass it.
Problems in the object.
Oh, sorry. Which one did you want?
The problems.
Oh, the problems. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry for taking the time. yeah, this. So first of all, I think that the first two problems are actually one problem, because if you provide a theory that gives unifications to the value, you're providing the ground for objective value, right? So suppose that I say, it's God, commandment, or I say, it's our biology and evolution, and whatever is good for fit in evolution, right? Well, then I'm giving unification and I'm giving the ground for objective value, right? So you can put them together. And second, I think that, well, you might think that this is a problem, but it's a very different kind of problem that the hedonist gets, because this is more like saying, your theory is lacking a bit, there is something that you have to elaborate on, while the experience machine example is just a straight kind of counter argument, right? So in one case, it's like, yeah, you have a bit more work to do. And in the other case is, I have an objection that if you don't answer, your theory doesn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have other thoughts, but I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, so I don't think they're the same problem. So the fact that it lacks you. So actually, if pleasure is understood in a certain way, then hedonism actually faces the same problem of objective value. Because if you think that pleasure is something that is intrinsically good in virtue of the phenomenology itself, in virtue of the way it feels, then you get the problem. You also get a sort of resonance problem too, right? So like someone can be, you could force someone to have pleasure even if they don't want it. And according to that sort of hedonist, they would be made better off. Mm-hmm. So when pleasure is understood in that way, then it does face that problem. But that sort of view would still be more unified than the objective list theory, because there's just one objective good on the list, according to that version of hedonism, rather than several things on the list, as the sort of view that I presented. That if you have a different view of pleasure, if you have an attitudinal view of pleasure, for instance, then you don't run into the resonance problem. So pleasure, according to attitudinal views, is basically dependent on you having positive attitudes to the sensation. So if you have a certain sensation that most people associate with pleasure, but you dislike it, then that's enough for it to be a pain on attitudinal views. But again, so that sort of view of pleasure would avoid the resonance problem, and it wouldn't be a kind of value that holds independently of people's responses or attitudes. So that's where I think the two problems can come apart. Yeah. Did you have another follow-up?
If I can, but if I cannot.
Or maybe we should.
Yeah, we'll go to another person.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Henry, great presentation. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask a question about your meaningfulness and pleasure sort of theory, if I can, acknowledging that it's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
The more observants among us here may know that I occasionally go for runs in the local neighborhood where I sort of flail my arms around about wildly and get very red in the face. And I genuinely do not enjoy the experience of running, but I run for the sort of afterwards experience of feeling elated and happy. So I suppose it's an example of a trial in which the process itself is not pleasurable, but is meaningful because of the output. Now, if we imagine someone, and this is kind of, I acknowledge, like a bit of a stupid example because it's very unlikely to actually arise in the real world, but we imagine someone who's perpetually going through trials which are meaningful for them because they have some kind of pleasurable outcome which they're working towards, but they never reach that outcome because they're so obsessed with constantly working on these meaningful trials, then it seems to me they can't be living a good life. So I wonder if in your developing theory, is it sort of a matrix where you have to have some degree of meaningfulness and also some degree of pleasure? Or is it that a meaningful experience for your purposes is one that ends in pleasure? And if so, what's the difference between, like, isn't it just pleasure with extra steps?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I think that meaningfulness is sufficient to make someone's life good. So even in your example of the tribulation case, I think that, you know, that would be a good life. It would be better, I would agree, if they also had more pleasant experiences. But I think it's, and also if it's, well, we have to be careful here too, though. So like, does it also have a lot of pain in it? Because then we have to compare, right? So if there's a lot of pain in that life that come with the tribulations, then, and that pain maybe is enough to outweigh the meaningfulness, then that could be a bad life for the person. But if the pain does not outweigh the meaningfulness, if these tribulations, if the person really does deeply endorse their activities and they have a deep conviction that what they're doing is important, then depending on how strong that deep conviction is, and depending on how strong that deep endorsement is, I think it could be the case that that life can still be good, even if it has some pain in it. But yeah, how exactly to determine how much you should have when one outweighs the other, that's still something that I need to think a lot more about. Yeah.
You can keep going.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so this might be different from the previous questions, and I do appreciate a lot of what was presented within the theories. But to what extent are these theories either relying on or embedded in capitalistic notions of pleasure, meaning, desire?
I'm not sure. I'd have to think more about that. Was there like a certain part of
The
the theory
example
had
that you were deducing at the beginning was like good education, good job, money produces
Right.
the essential goods. And so how much does like the ability for one's happiness like rely on these theories embedding capitalist notions that you have to?
Oh, yeah. So those are just like examples I use just because, you know, we're all in school and so we could all relate to, you know, asking like why we're in school and everything. But yeah, you could replace it with other examples too. So like the basic idea that I was trying to illustrate there was that the idea of intrinsic value. So the thing that ultimately had value or had fundamental value that contributed to well-being on that list was just happiness. And people can take happiness not just in those, you know, goods that are associated with capitalism, but they can take happiness in a number of things. And they can take happiness in being in a community, they can take happiness in being in a loving relationship, they can take happiness in being alone in nature. So any of those things can be what someone takes their pleasure or happiness in. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent talk. Thanks for that. You already sort of provided some problems for the desire satisfaction theory, but I thought of one that maybe is stupid, but I thought that is a bigger problem than the other ones, and that is it seems very reductionist in the sense that like at the very beginning when you define it, you sort of decouple the feeling aspect, right? So then a machine can have desire satisfaction. A machine wants to run a program. It runs a program. Does it have a good life? So
That's a very good question. Thanks, Rishi, for asking that. So it really depends on what we mean by desire, right? So there's this behavioral sense of desire where a desire basically just explains, you know, some organism's actions or behavior. But then there's like this deeper sense of desire that we typically associate with having certain phenomenology or mental states or experiences. And so if that's what we mean by the relevant notion of desire, if it's this deeper sense of desire, and I think that's what philosophers will probably have in mind, is that deeper sense of desire where you're actually feel like you're attracted to the thing. And so then the question would be, well, then the point would be that, well, as far as we know, these machines or, these AI systems don't have experiences or they don't have that deeper sense of desire. If they did, then sure. But yeah, I think we have to be careful about how we're understanding desire. Yeah. Alex.
Oh, I had a question about the informed modification of the desire
Oh,
satisfaction
yeah.
theory. So you showed the example of the witch like giving the poisoned apple.
Right.
And then you get like all the context behind it, and then you assume that the person wouldn't eat the apple.
Right.
But I was just curious because I know like in real life people get full information on something, like for example, like alcohol. And we still drink alcohol even though we know it's poisonous for us.
Yeah.
So how does that play into it?
So that's that's a good question. I'm trying to think of how the desire satisfaction theorists will respond to that. So I guess one thing they could say is that you have to not only take into consideration your desire satisfaction right now, but your desire satisfactions and frustrations in the future, right? So even if drinking alcohol right now satisfies your desires, if it will lead to, a bunch of desire frustration the next morning or the next day because you're hungover, then overall that would actually be worse for you because over time, you're not satisfying your desires as well as you would if you decided to not drink the alcohol. Yeah. There's some, should we go to a Zoom question?
Let me just check. Okay, we have one here from Kelly. Sorry, just over here. Is tolerating pain and suffering part of hedonism? If not, how may that be seen along with meaningful experiences as part of the good life?
Sorry, would you mind reading it one more time?
You could also
Sorry.
see it
No.
written up. Sorry.
Is tolerating pain, suffering, or hedonism? I guess one clarifying, is it tolerating your own pain or tolerating other people's pain? If it's tolerating your own pain, I think the hedonist would want to say that you should avoid pain as much as possible. And you should try to get pleasant experiences as much as possible. And you should avoid suffering like the plague and get happiness as much as you can. And then, okay, so if not, how may that be seen? How may that be seen as part of the good life? I just don't think they would grant that would be part of the good life. That the good life solely consider that. Well, one thing you have to do is, in order to consider whether your life is good as a whole, you have to sum up all the pleasant experiences, and you have to also sum up all the painful experiences and subtract the painful experiences from the pleasant ones in order to determine whether your life is good on the whole. That's probably something I should have clarified a bit earlier. So if you have more pain in your life than you do pleasure, then your life is bad overall. And if you have more pleasure than you do pain, then your life is good overall. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that might
Well, we're gonna wrap up here,
Okay.
as always.
Yeah, I think that might conclude like the formal Q&A portion, but Anthony, would you be willing to stay behind?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can stay for a couple minutes.
Yeah, please do, take advantage of at this fantastic talk. We will continue on our resident member series next week with Aditya talking about copper at a crossroads. And so looking forward to seeing you, many of you there. But without further ado, please do join me in thanking our speaker once.